The man in seat 8A boarded the plane without drawing any attention. He moved slowly down the aisle, one hand holding a small carry-on bag, the other guiding his 8-year-old daughter beside him. She walked with light steps, looking around with wide eyes, excited by everything. For her, flying was still an adventure. For him, it was just another long day. He helped her into the window seat and lifted their bag into the overhead bin. His movements were careful but tired, like someone who had been running on little sleep for a long time. He checked her seatbelt twice before sitting down next to her. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded, pressing her face toward the window. "We're really above the clouds this time, right?" He gave a small smile. "If the weather's clear enough." She leaned back, already talking about what she wanted to see when they landed. He listened, nodding, but his mind wandered. He had promised her this trip months ago, after her mother passed away 2 years earlier. He had tried his best to keep life steady. School, homework, dinner, bedtime stories. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos online. He burned dinner more times than he wanted to admit, but he showed up every day. People often called him strong. He didn't feel strong. He felt tired, but he kept going anyway. As the plane pushed back from the gate, he felt the familiar hum of engines starting. He had not flown often since leaving his old job. Commercial flights made him uneasy in a way he never admitted. He preferred being the one in control, not sitting still while someone else handled everything. His daughter grabbed his hand as the plane began to move. He squeezed it gently. "Takeoff is the best part," she whispered. He looked at her and smiled again. "We'll see about that." The engines grew louder. The plane sped down the runway. For a brief second, his chest tightened, not from fear exactly, but from memory. His body remembered this feeling. The push of speed. The moment right before leaving the ground. Years ago, this had been his normal. Now it felt distant, like a story from another lifetime. The wheels lifted, and the city fell away beneath them. His daughter laughed softly as buildings turned into tiny shapes. They climbed higher. The sky outside shifted from gray to bright white as they broke through the clouds. Sunlight filled the cabin. The seatbelt sign stayed on for a while, then finally clicked off. He let out a slow breath, without realizing he had been holding it. "See," she said proudly. "Best part." He nodded. "You win." Once the plane leveled out, flight attendants began moving through the aisle. The air felt calmer. Passengers opened laptops, adjusted headphones, or closed their eyes. His daughter rested her head on his shoulder. "Can I watch my movie now?" "Go ahead," he said. She pulled out her tablet, already prepared. He watched her for a moment, making sure she was settled, then leaned his head back against the seat. He hadn't slept well the night before. He rarely did. Even when the house was quiet, his mind wasn't. There were bills to think about, work deadlines, school meetings, and the quiet spaces in the evening when the house felt too still. Sometimes he stayed up just to avoid lying in the dark alone with his thoughts. He closed his eyes just for a moment. The steady sound of the engines created a rhythm. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. The warmth from the sunlight through the window made the seat feel softer. His mind drifted. For a while, he was not a passenger. He was younger, wearing a flight suit, running toward a jet under a wide-open sky. The world felt sharp and clear then. Every sound mattered. Every move had purpose. He had loved flying, not because it was exciting, but because it required focus. When he was in the air, nothing else existed. Then life had shifted. His wife had gotten sick. Doctor visits replaced training flights. Hospital rooms replaced briefing rooms. He learned how fragile everything was. When she was gone, he looked at his daughter and understood that flying missions far away was no longer his path. He chose the ground. The plane hit a small patch of light turbulence. His eyes opened briefly. Around him, a few passengers adjusted in their seats. It was nothing serious, just air currents shifting. He looked at his daughter. She was focused on her movie, unaware of the slight bump. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded without looking away from the screen. He leaned back again. Across the aisle, a businessman typed quickly on his laptop. A couple 2 rows ahead whispered to each other. A young mother tried to calm her baby. It was an ordinary flight, filled with ordinary people, each carrying private stories no one else knew. No one looked at the man in seat 8A twice. And that was how he preferred it. He shifted slightly, trying to get comfortable. His body still carried old habits. Even while resting, he noticed sounds automatically. Engine pitch, airflow changes, distant chimes from the cockpit. He didn't analyze them on purpose. It was just there, like background awareness that never fully turned off. He told himself to relax. He wasn't responsible for anything up here. That chapter of his life was over. His daughter's head slowly slid from his shoulder as she drifted to sleep. The tablet slipped sideways, still playing quietly. He reached over, paused the movie, and gently set it aside. He adjusted the small airline blanket over her. For a moment, he just watched her. Her hair fell across her face. He brushed it back carefully. She looked peaceful. Children could fall asleep anywhere, he thought, trusting the world without knowing how unpredictable it could be. He hoped she would keep that trust for as long as possible. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A message from a co-worker asking about a report due next week. He typed a short reply and put the phone away. Work would wait. He closed his eyes again. The steady hum continued. The cabin remained calm. Minutes passed. He didn't know how long he had been asleep when a stronger jolt shook the plane. This one was sharper. His eyes opened immediately. His body reacted before his mind caught up. The aircraft dipped slightly, then steadied. Around him, heads lifted. Someone gasped softly. The seatbelt sign turned back on with a ding. He looked at the overhead panels. Everything seemed normal. Just turbulence, he told himself. A flight attendant's voice came over the speaker, polite and controlled, asking everyone to remain seated. He reached for his daughter's hand. She stirred but didn't wake fully. "It's okay," he whispered, even though she wasn't fully aware. The plane hit another pocket of rough air. The shaking lasted longer this time. Not violent, but enough to make people uncomfortable. A few overhead bins rattled. The businessman across the aisle stopped typing. He felt that old awareness sharpen slightly. His eyes moved toward the front of the cabin, listening carefully. The engine still sounded steady. The motion felt irregular, but manageable. He told himself again that commercial pilots handled turbulence every day. This was routine for them. Still, he stayed awake now. His daughter opened her eyes slowly. "Are we okay?" "Yes," he said calmly. "Just some bumps." She nodded and leaned closer to him. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The turbulence eased after a few minutes. The plane stabilized again. A quiet wave of relief moved through the cabin. People shifted, some laughing nervously. And without realizing it, the man in seat 8A was no longer just a tired single father trying to get through a flight. A small part of him, the part trained years ago to pay attention when others didn't, had quietly woken up. The shaking did not stop completely. It eased for a moment, just enough for people to breathe again, and then it returned. Not violent, not out of control, but steady and uncomfortable. The kind that made you aware you were thousands of feet above the ground. The man in seat 8A stayed still. His arm remained around his daughter, who was fully awake now. She looked at him, searching his face for answers. "It's just air moving differently," he said softly. "Planes are built for this." He kept his voice even. Calm voices were contagious. Panic was contagious too. He had learned that long ago. A few rows back, someone laughed nervously. A cup rolled off a tray table and spilled across the aisle. A flight attendant hurried down, steadying herself with one hand on the seats. Then the engines made a sound that didn't match the rhythm from before. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice. It wasn't louder. It was uneven. His jaw tightened slightly. He tilted his head just a little, listening harder. The plane dipped again, this time sharper. Gasps filled the cabin. A baby started crying loudly. The overhead lights flickered for half a second before stabilizing. His daughter grabbed his shirt tightly. "Dad, I'm here," he said. He looked around. The businessman across the aisle had stopped pretending to work. The couple ahead were holding hands. A young college student near the window had tears forming in her eyes. The seatbelt sign remained on. No flight attendants were in sight now. Another ding echoed through the cabin. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom. At first, it sounded steady, professional, controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some unexpected turbulence." Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. There was a pause. Too long of a pause. He noticed it immediately. The captain continued, but something had changed. There was strain in the tone now. We are currently addressing a situation in the cockpit. We appreciate your patience. A situation. The man in seat 8A felt something cold move through his chest. Pilots chose their words carefully. Situation was not random. He looked toward the front again. A minute passed. Then two. The turbulence did not grow worse, but it didn't disappear either. The plane felt slightly off balance, like a car that needed alignment. His mind began to work quietly. Airspeed, altitude, engine sound, control response. He had not sat in a cockpit in years, but some things never left you. The intercom clicked on again, but this time it wasn't the captain. It was a flight attendant, and her voice trembled despite her effort to hide it. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any licensed pilots or individuals with professional flight experience on board, please press your call button immediately. The words landed heavily in the cabin. For a second, no one reacted. People looked at each other, confused. The announcement repeated, slower this time. If there are any licensed pilots, especially those with experience operating commercial or military aircraft, please make yourself known. A murmur spread through the rows. His daughter looked up at him. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away, because he knew exactly what it meant. Something was wrong in the cockpit, and it wasn't minor. He felt his heartbeat begin to pick up, not in panic, but in awareness. His body remembered this moment, the shift from normal to critical, the space where decisions mattered. He looked down at his daughter again. She was watching him closely now. "You're a pilot," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He had told her stories before, not detailed ones, just enough for her to understand that he used to fly planes. That was a long time ago, he replied gently. The call button lights stayed off across the cabin. No one moved. Another announcement came, this time directly from the captain again. The comm was thinner now. If there are any combat pilots or individuals trained in high-pressure flight conditions, we request your immediate assistance. Combat pilots. The words hit differently. The cabin went silent. He closed his eyes for a brief second. He hadn't heard that term directed at him in years. He had packed away that identity along with his old flight suit and medals. He had traded it for school lunches and bedtime stories. He told himself there were other pilots on board. There had to be. Statistically, someone else would stand. He waited. No one did. A man 3 rows back whispered to his wife, "Do you think this is serious?" The young college student began to cry quietly. His daughter squeezed his arm again. "Dad." He looked at her. Really looked at her. In that moment, the cabin noise faded. The whispers, the crying, the engine hum, all of it blurred into the background. He saw only her face. He thought about promises. He had promised to always come home. He had promised her mother, in a hospital room filled with machines and quiet beeping sounds, that he would protect their child no matter what. Protecting didn't always mean staying seated. The plane shook again, slightly harder this time. A luggage bin popped open and a bag fell into the aisle. Someone screamed briefly. That was enough. He pressed the call button above his seat. The small light turned on. Within seconds, a flight attendant appeared. Her face was pale, but she forced a professional expression. "Yes, sir." He kept his voice low and steady. "I'm a former combat pilot. I have thousands of hours logged. What's happening?" For a split second, relief flashed across her face. "Please come with me," she said quickly. He turned to his daughter. She was staring at him, eyes wide. "I need to help for a few minutes," he told her gently. "Are we in danger?" she asked. He didn't lie to her. He never did. "They need extra hands," he said. "That's all." She swallowed but nodded bravely. "Okay." He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly, not rushing. Panic spreads fast when people move too quickly. Passengers nearby watched him stand. "You're a pilot?" the businessman asked. He gave a small nod. "Thank God." Someone whispered. He leaned down to his daughter. "Stay buckled. I'll be right back." She wrapped her arms around him for one tight second. He held her close, then gently stepped into the aisle. The flight attendant guided him forward quickly but carefully. The plane rocked again as they moved. As he walked, he felt something shift inside him. The tired single father faded into the background. Training returned. Focus sharpened. He noticed everything: cabin angle, vibration patterns, the timing of turbulence waves. When they reached the cockpit door, another crew member stood there waiting. The door opened just wide enough for him to slip inside. Before stepping through, he looked back once. Passengers were watching him like he carried something rare. Hope. He stepped into the cockpit. The door closed behind him, and in that moment seat 8A was empty. The cockpit felt smaller than he remembered. Not physically smaller, but heavier. The air inside carried tension. The captain sat in the left seat, shoulders tight, eyes locked on the instruments. Sweat lined his forehead even though the cabin temperature. The captain glanced up when the door closed. "You're the pilot?" he asked quickly. "Former combat pilot," the man replied. His voice was steady. "Flew fixed wing. Logged over 3,000 hours." The captain didn't waste time with surprise or doubt. He nodded once. "My co-pilot had a medical emergency about 10 minutes ago. He's conscious, but he can't operate controls reliably. We've been managing, but the crosswinds ahead are stronger than forecasted. I need another trained set of hands." The man stepped closer, scanning the instrument panel without touching anything yet. The layout was different from the aircraft he used to fly. More modern, more automated, but the fundamentals were the same. Airspeed, altitude, heading, engine output. Those languages never changed. "What's our current status?" he asked. The captain spoke quickly. "Autopilot is engaged, but we're experiencing intermittent fluctuations. Nothing catastrophic, just unstable. We're rerouting to the nearest major airport, about 30 minutes out." The plane shifted slightly under them, a small sideways push. The man instinctively braced his feet, feeling the movement through the floor. He studied the attitude indicator. Slight roll. "Correcting. Crosswinds?" he asked. "Stronger at lower altitude," the captain replied. "Storm cell building faster than predicted." The co-pilot groaned softly. The flight attendant adjusted the mask and looked up at the two men with worried eyes. "Will he be okay?" she asked. "He needs to stay still," the captain said. "Focus on him." The man moved into the right seat, carefully sliding in without bumping any controls. He adjusted the seat height quickly, aligning his view with the instrument panel. His hands hovered above the controls for a moment. It felt familiar, not like riding a bike, more like stepping back into a language he hadn't spoken in years, but still understood. "Talk me through your approach plan," he said calmly. The captain explained their descent path, the alternate runway options, and the wind readings from air traffic control. The man listened carefully, nodding occasionally. Outside the windshield, dark clouds loomed in the distance. Lightning flickered far away, not close, but visible. Inside the cockpit, the noise of the engines blended with the faint crackle of radio communication. "Cabin is secure," a voice came through the intercom from a flight attendant. "Passengers are seated." He thought briefly of his daughter. Seat 8A. He pictured her small hands gripping the armrest. He imagined her watching the closed cockpit door, waiting. He pushed the image aside gently, not because he didn't care, but because he needed to focus fully now. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's stabilize her manually for a bit. I want to feel how she's responding." The captain nodded. "Autopilot disengaging." A soft tone sounded as the system clicked off. The man placed his hands on the controls. For a split second, everything slowed. He felt the pressure through his fingertips, the slight resistance, the weight of the aircraft responding to input. The plane dipped lightly. He adjusted smoothly, not overcorrecting. Years ago, instructors had drilled that into him. Small inputs, steady hands. "Good," the captain muttered under his breath. The crosswind nudged them again, pushing the nose slightly off heading. He corrected gently. In the cabin, passengers likely felt only small shifts. Nothing dramatic. But in the cockpit, every change mattered. "Storm's moving faster," the captain said, scanning updated radar. "We'll have a tighter descent window." "Then we keep it clean and simple," the man replied. "No sharp adjustments unless necessary." Another small vibration passed through the aircraft. He adjusted trim carefully. The co-pilot shifted weakly in his seat. The flight attendant whispered something reassuring to him. The man glanced at the altitude reading. "Start gradual descent," he said. The captain contacted air traffic control, voice controlled but firm. Clearance was granted. They began descending. Cloud swallowed the plane. Visibility dropped to gray. Rain began tapping against the windshield, soft at first, then harder. The aircraft trembled slightly as air currents changed. He breathed evenly. Combat training had taught him something important. Fear shows up when you imagine outcomes. Control returns when you focus on the present moment. Right now, the present moment was airspeed, pitch angle, wind direction. Nothing else. The captain looked at him briefly. "How long since you last flew?" "Years," he answered honestly. The captain raised an eyebrow slightly, but didn't comment. The man's hand spoke for him. They broke through one layer of cloud only to enter another darker one. Lightning flashed again in the distance. Inside the cabin, a muffled scream echoed, faintly through the cockpit door. Not loud, but noticeable. He felt it in his chest. He imagined his daughter hearing that sound. "Let's keep this smooth," he said quietly. The captain nodded. Wind readings updated again. Crosswind from the right. Stronger now. "We may have to angle slightly," the captain said. "I'll handle correction," the man replied. Rain streaked harder across the windshield. The runway was still too far to see. Altitude dropped steadily. 5,000 feet. The captain read aloud. The man adjusted throttle gently, keeping descent rate controlled. He noticed a slight lag in one of the engine responses. Not failure, just delayed response. "Feel that?" he asked. "Yes," the captain said. "It's been inconsistent since the turbulence started." "Compensate gradually. Don't chase it." The plane rocked again, stronger this time. He tightened his grip but kept movement small. His breathing stayed slow. In his mind, he heard his old instructor's voice. "Trust your training. Trust your hands." They broke below the heaviest cloud layer. Through sheets of rain, faint lights appeared in the distance. "Runway in sight," the captain said. The man focused forward. Wind pushed them sideways again, harder now as they dropped lower. He corrected carefully, aligning the nose. The ground approached steadily. "Steady," the captain murmured. "Steady," he echoed. For a brief second, his thoughts flashed to Seat 8A again. He pictured his daughter's face. Then he let the thought pass. There would be time for that after. Right now, there was only altitude, airspeed, alignment. The runway lights grew clearer. Rain still pounded, but visibility was enough. "Almost there," the captain said. The man adjusted throttle slightly, easing descent. The aircraft shuddered once more as crosswind tried to pull them off-center. He countered smoothly. Wheels inches above runway. Then, touchdown. Firm. Controlled. Not gentle, but solid. The plane's weight settled onto the runway with a heavy thud. Reverse thrust engaged. Speed decreased steadily. Inside the cockpit, neither man spoke for a few seconds. The aircraft slowed. Rain continued to fall. Finally, the captain exhaled deeply. "We're down," he said. The man loosened his grip slowly, feeling the tremor in his hands only now that it was over. In the cabin behind them, applause began building, faint at first, then louder. He closed his eyes for one brief second. Seat 8A was waiting. The man in the right seat exhaled slowly, his hands finally letting go of the controls. His fingers were stiff, a little shaky from the adrenaline. He looked at the captain, who gave a small nod. That simple acknowledgement carried respect, relief, and a hint of gratitude. They had made it down safely, and both knew it had been close. The co-pilot sat back, pale and exhausted, but stable. His breathing had slowed, steadying now that the immediate crisis was over. They didn't need words to communicate. A glance, a slight movement, a subtle nod. Years of experience had taught the man in Seat 8A that sometimes actions spoke louder than words. He had flown through situations where talking could have been dangerous. Calm, quiet focus was the key. The plane slowed further, rolling to a near stop at the gate. He watched the ground crew maneuver around, guiding the aircraft into place with precise hand signals. Everything was procedural, ordinary to someone who had watched countless landings, but now it felt monumental. Every motion, every careful step by the crew, was part of a chain that had worked because people had kept their composure. He finally allowed himself to glance at the door, separating the cockpit from the cabin. He thought of his daughter, waiting for him in seat 8A, unaware of how close danger had come. His chest tightened slightly. Protecting her had always been his #1 priority, and today had been no different. He had answered a call, a sudden demand for help, and stepped into a situation where lives depended on him. That instinct had never left him, even after years away from the cockpit. The captain spoke, breaking the silence. "Cabin crew, you can prepare to deplane." His voice was steady, but his eyes reflected relief. The storm outside was still ongoing, but the aircraft was safe. The immediate danger was over. Everyone on board could breathe again. The man in the right seat unbuckled his harness slowly, his muscles stiff from tension. He stood and stretched just slightly, a motion that reminded him he was no longer in combat or flight training, but in a place where consequences were less immediate, though still serious. The cabin crew approached, their faces showing appreciation and concern. One of them touched his shoulder lightly. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved us." He nodded politely. "Just doing what I could." The humility in his words belied the magnitude of what had happened. Many people would have called this heroism. He called it necessity, survival, responsibility. There had been no room for hesitation in those minutes. Every thought, every action, had been measured, deliberate. He had done what had to be done. The door to the cockpit opened, and he stepped out. The cabin was quiet at first, passengers still processing what had happened. Then, as soon as some realized the danger had passed, the murmurs grew louder. Eyes turned toward him. Some recognized the uniformity of his posture, the calm certainty in his movements. Others saw only a tired man, stepping out to walk back to his seat. The applause started quietly, small claps from a few rows. Then it spread. People were smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes, others still in shock. They had survived a frightening event, and the man in seat 8A had been a quiet presence in the background who had made the difference. Every single person on that plane had lived through those moments because he had stood up and acted. He walked down the aisle toward his daughter. She saw him first and grinned, though she did not understand fully. Her small arms wrapped around him in a tight hug as he bent down to meet her. "You were gone a long time," she whispered. "I had to help," he said softly. "Everything is fine now." She leaned against him, satisfied with that answer. For a child, sometimes it was enough that her parent was back, safe, and smiling. She did not need the details of turbulence, crosswinds, or emergency procedures. She only needed her father, solid and present. Passengers around them continued to murmur their gratitude. Some spoke to him directly. "Thank you," one woman said. "You saved us." Another man simply shook his head in awe. "I don't know what we would have done without you." He smiled faintly, accepting their words politely but without pride. Recognition was not why he had acted. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough. He settled back into seat 8A, buckling his daughter in beside him. The seat belt felt tighter than usual after the stress, but it was a comforting constraint, a small reminder of order after chaos. She rested her head against his shoulder again, tired now after the excitement and fear. He stroked her hair lightly, feeling the warmth of her trust, the quiet reassurance that everything was okay. The flight attendants walked past, checking on everyone. A few offered him small smiles or nods. They did not need to say anything more. He understood the unspoken respect. Everyone who had been in that cabin, everyone who had experienced those tense minutes, had felt the weight of what had just happened. And though he had no intention of staying in the spotlight, the acknowledgement was enough. Outside, the rain continued to fall, streaking the windows with water. The storm still raged, but inside the plane, a calm had returned. The engines hummed steadily, carrying the aircraft toward the gate. The passengers were beginning to relax, some stretching, others closing their eyes briefly in relief. He looked at the safety card in the seat pocket in front of him, its illustration simple and neat. Years ago, he had studied these same concepts in a completely different context, not as instructions for passengers, but as reference points for quick decision-making. Now it felt almost poetic. Life had a way of circling back to remind him of lessons learned long ago. The plane finally came to a complete stop. The seatbelt signs clicked off. The cabin lights returned to their usual brightness. People began to gather their belongings, a slow shuffle of relief and routine. The man unbuckled himself and helped his daughter with her small backpack. She had an eager smile, ready to leave the aircraft and move toward the next part of their journey. As they prepared to stand, he took a deep breath. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee, antiseptic, and the lingering stress of what had just happened. It was ordinary, mundane, yet extraordinary because they had survived. The ordinary world resumed around them, but he knew that moments like these left a permanent mark on everyone involved. Passengers exchanged stories quietly. Some talked about the turbulence. Others described the captain's calm voice and the announcement requesting help. They all looked at him as they walked past. Subtle nods, quiet words of thanks. He did not respond extensively. A polite smile, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and he continued. Finally, they reached the end of the aisle. He held his daughter's hand, guiding her toward the exit stairs, the wet tarmac outside glimmering under airport lights. Each step felt steady, deliberate. He focused on keeping his daughter safe, attentive to her movements, aware of the world around them. Even after everything, his responsibility remained clear. She came first. Outside the plane, ground crew waved, directing the passengers toward the terminal. Rain continued to fall steadily, but he and his daughter moved quickly, keeping pace with the small crowd. She looked up at him, excitement returning, curiosity growing. He smiled, letting her lead with questions about everything she could see. Planes taxiing, luggage carts moving, lights reflecting on puddles. For her, it was an adventure. For him, it was normal life again, familiar yet still miraculous. They reached the terminal, doors closing behind them. Inside, warmth replaced the rain. The hum of conversation, rolling suitcases, distant announcements. All felt grounding, a return to stability. He kept his daughter close, listening to her chatter, answering simply, letting her absorb the ordinary after the extraordinary. He knew the news would reach passengers soon, maybe even make headlines. Others might call him a hero. He did not mind, but it was not important. What mattered was the flight, the people on it, the calm he had maintained, and the safe landing. He had acted, nothing more. That was enough for him. As they walked toward baggage claim, he reflected quietly. Moments like these reminded him that ordinary people sometimes faced extraordinary situations. And in those moments, instinct, training, and courage mattered more than recognition or reward. He had done what was necessary. That was enough. His daughter skipped slightly ahead, her curiosity guiding her. He watched her for a moment, a soft smile touching his lips. Today had been scary, yes, but she had been safe. That was everything. All else could be rebuilt, explained later, or simply left unspoken. Today, they had survived together. And for the first time in years, the man felt a quiet peace settle inside him. He had answered a call, faced a storm, and come back to his daughter. Ordinary life awaited, mundane and full of small challenges. Yet he knew, deep inside, that he had met something extraordinary and had come through it. And that, he thought, was enough. The terminal was warm and bustling, filled with a low hum of conversation, rolling suitcases, and the faint smell of coffee. The rain had stopped outside, leaving glistening patches on the pavement and puddles reflecting the bright airport lights. People moved quickly, eager to reach their next destinations, but he walked slowly, keeping one hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. She skipped along beside him, still full of energy, pointing out the shiny floors, the moving walkways, and the people carrying large bags. Her excitement made him smile, even though he still felt the weight of what had happened just moments ago. He had answered a call that no one else could, but now the world felt normal again, almost mundane. The relief from the cockpit had yet to fade from his body, a lingering adrenaline that reminded him just how close things had been. He watched the other passengers, some talking in hushed tones about the turbulence, others showing gratitude in subtle ways. Some recognized him as the man who had gone into the cockpit, though not all could put words to it. A polite nod, a half-smile, a quick glance of respect. That was all he needed. His daughter tugged at his sleeve, asking questions about the planes outside the terminal windows. He answered simply, keeping his tone light. He wanted to keep her safe from the worry and fear he had felt, at least for now. She didn't need to know the exact details, the technical challenges, the minute-by-minute pressure of stabilizing a plane full of people. She only needed to know that he was there, that they were safe, and that everything was okay. They walked toward the baggage claim area. The sound of suitcases rolling over tiles, announcements over the loudspeakers, and people chatting created a normal rhythm, a return to ordinary life. The man in seat 8A felt the calm settle gradually. He was tired, yes, physically and emotionally, but the weight in his chest that had been there during the flight had lifted slightly. The fear of what could have gone wrong was replaced by the simple gratitude of survival. At baggage claim, passengers were waiting for their luggage. He found their suitcase on the carousel and picked it up, balancing it carefully while keeping a hand on his daughter. She was watching the spinning carousel with fascination, pointing out each new piece of luggage as if it were a toy. He smiled quietly. This was life, ordinary life, and yet it felt precious after what they had endured. Some of the passengers approached him, their faces a mix of curiosity, relief, and admiration. "Thank you," one woman said. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Another passenger added quietly, "You saved us." "Really?" He nodded politely to each, accepting their gratitude without drawing attention to himself. He did not need to be praised. He had done what needed to be done. That was enough. He glanced down at his daughter, who was examining her small backpack, seemingly unaware of the attention around her. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "Daddy, can we get something to eat now?" "Yes," he replied with a small smile. "Let's find somewhere to eat." They walked through the terminal, passing cafes and small restaurants. People continued to watch him, some whispering to each other, others just glancing with quiet respect. He ignored it. He had no desire to make a spectacle. He had saved lives, yes, but his reward was the knowledge that everyone was safe, especially his daughter. They found a small cafe near the gate, and he bought them both a sandwich and a bottle of water. She sat on the high chair, swinging her legs, chatting about everything she could see. He listened, answering when necessary, letting her take the lead in conversation. He focused on her, on this simple moment, letting the relief of being alive and safe settle in. As he sat there, eating quietly, he thought about the flight. He replayed the moments in the cockpit in his mind, the tension, the calculations, the calm that had been necessary to keep the plane steady. It all felt surreal now, like a story he could tell one day. But not today. Today, he was a father, and that was enough. News crews had arrived at the airport, speaking to passengers who had filmed the turbulence or the announcement for help. Some tried to ask about the man who had gone into the cockpit. He remained unnoticed for the most part, blending into the crowd. That was exactly how he wanted it. No interviews, no attention, just a quiet return to normal life. After finishing their meal, he stood and gathered their belongings. His daughter held his hand, trusting him completely. He guided her through the terminal toward the exit. Outside, the rain had left the streets slick, reflecting the lights of the city. They walked steadily, taking their time. He kept his senses alert, not because danger was near, but because it was habit. Years of training and life experiences had made him aware of his surroundings in a way that never fully left him. As they reached the parking lot, he carried their suitcase to the car and helped his daughter into her seat. She chattered about everything she had seen, pointing out buses, cars, and people walking dogs. He smiled quietly, listening, enjoying the ordinary moment that felt so extraordinary after the tension of the flight. Driving away from the airport, he kept his eyes on the road, but also allowed his mind to wander. He thought about the passengers, the crew, the captain, and the co-pilot. They had all been part of the moment, all depending on his presence, his calm, his skill. He had been a stranger in their lives for a few minutes, yet those minutes had mattered more than anything else. His daughter looked up at him. "Daddy, were you scared?" He thought carefully before answering. "A little," he said, "but being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you keep going anyway." She nodded thoughtfully, as if understanding something important for the first time. He smiled, relieved that she could grasp even a small part of the lesson he had learned long ago. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. They drove in silence for a while, the sound of the tires on wet pavement filling the space. The city lights passed by in streaks, and he felt a calm he hadn't felt in a long time. The flight had reminded him of who he was, what he was capable of, and the importance of staying present for the people he loved most. When they finally reached their destination, he helped his daughter out of the car. She ran ahead slightly, eager to explore. He watched her for a moment, letting her excitement and energy fill him with warmth. Then he carried the suitcase inside, setting it down gently. The house was quiet, safe, familiar. It smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and home-cooked meals, a comforting contrast to the sterile air of the plane and the tense atmosphere of the cockpit. He set the suitcase down, then turned to his daughter. "Time for bed," he said gently. She protested playfully, as children do, but eventually complied. He tucked her in carefully, brushing her hair back from her face. She looked up at him sleepily. "Good night, Daddy," she whispered. "Good night," he replied, kissing her forehead softly. "Sleep well." He left the room quietly and sat in the living room for a moment, the weight of the day settling in fully now that the immediate danger had passed. He thought about the passengers, the crew, the captain, and even the storm that had tested them all. He reflected on the life he had chosen, the life of a single father, raising a child, finding meaning not in recognition or fame, but in responsibility, love, and quiet courage. No news crew, no story online, no applause could capture what he felt. That sense of purpose, of knowing he had done what was necessary, was private, intimate, and deeply human. It was a reminder that ordinary people sometimes rise to extraordinary challenges without seeking attention, driven by instinct, training, and love. He sat back, closing his eyes briefly. The house was quiet now. Rain had stopped, leaving the world outside calm and reflective. He had answered the call, saved lives, and returned to his daughter. That was enough. In the coming days, passengers would share their stories. Some might find him online. Some might call him a hero. He would not deny it, but he also would not seek it. His life remained grounded in the everyday: meals, school, bedtime stories, laughter, and the quiet moments between. He had flown through storms and survived, but the real victory was being able to return to the ordinary life he cherished most. He finally stood and moved to the window, looking out the world in silence. Everything appeared normal, the city lights flickering, cars moving, people living their lives. Yet he knew that for a brief moment, he had stepped into something extraordinary. He had acted when no one else could, and he had returned to safety. Returning to the living room, he sank into the couch, exhausted but at peace. His daughter's soft breathing came from the bedroom, a gentle reminder of why he had done what he did. The day had been full of tension, fear, and responsibility, but it had ended in calm and safety. He realized that this was what mattered most: protecting those he loved, acting when it counted, and returning to ordinary life with gratitude and humility. Everything else, recognition, applause, fame, was secondary. Life was not measured by the crises one survived, but by the quiet moments afterward, the moments when the world returned to calm, and loved ones were safe and near. He closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day wash over him. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own routines, its own small adventures. But tonight he allowed himself to simply be a father, a survivor, and someone who had quietly stepped forward when the moment demanded it. And that, he thought, was more than enough. The world outside went on. Children played. People laughed, argued, and rushed through their routines. But in the quiet living room, the man sat at peace, knowing he had done what needed to be done, and that the most important person in his life, his daughter, was safe, happy, and sound asleep. He let himself finally breathe, the storm of the day behind him, the ordinary world welcoming him back with open arms. In that moment, he realized that courage did not need to be celebrated. It only needed to be lived, and he had lived it fully, quietly, and without seeking recognition. His daughter slept safely, the plane was landed, and the world continued, unaware of how close it had come to disaster. For him, that was enough. For her, that was everything. And together, they had returned to life, ordinary, peaceful, and profoundly meaningful.